Have you ever had an experience where you thought about a particular person or idea or event, and then out of nowhere, it seems like this event or person just popped up in our lives that just completely shocked and surprised us? And this happens a lot more often to us than we realize. Now, oftentimes, many of us look at these events as just out of sheer coincidence or chance or just sheer luck. But what if there's more to that than meets the eye? What if, in fact, there are forces in our environment and within ourselves that, if we tap into, can radically transform our lives for the better? Or to put it another way, what if our thoughts and the emotional intensity behind our thoughts can actually influence what happens outside of us? And this is something, in fact, Carl Jung studied towards the end of his career, or more specifically, studying what's called synchronicity, which is what's going to be the topic of our lecture today. Hi, my name is Frank Nunez, and I'm with Teaching University. In this lecture today, we're going to be discussing Carl Jung's synchronicity and how our minds and our thoughts can influence our external environment. So before we begin class today, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel where you can get my latest lectures on personal growth, creativity, entrepreneurship, and wealth building. So Carl Jung describes synchronicity as the coming together of inner and outer events in a way that cannot be explained by cause and effect, and that is meaningful to the observer. So what Jung is saying here is that our internal world, or our thoughts, can influence what happens in our external world or our external environment. Now, if his analysis is true, then this has tremendous implications, because what this really means then is that we have much more power than we first thought, and that our thoughts and our behaviors and our personality can shape our personal reality. And that, in fact, we have the ability to transcend and overcome our self-limiting beliefs and the challenges that hold us back from being the person that we really want to be. And again, these implications are very profound. So then, what happens, however, is that unfortunately we don't notice these synchronicities in our lives because, let's face it, we live in a very busy and chaotic world where we're constantly distracted from all the noise that happens outside of us, where we don't really get the chance to observe our thoughts and behaviors and notice these synchronicities that happen in real time. So it's Carl Jung that said that it may seem that my discussion of synchronicity has led me away from my main theme, but I feel it's necessary to make at least a brief introductory reference to it because it is a Jungian hypothesis that seems to be pregnant with future possibilities of investigation and application. Synchronistic events, moreover, almost invariably accompany the crucial phases of the process of individuation, but too often they pass unnoticed because the individual has not learned to watch for such coincidence and to make them meaningful in relation to the symbolism of his dreams. So what Carl Jung is saying here is that for many of us, we are totally oblivious to the power of our thoughts and how they can potentially influence meaningful events in our environment. So often than not, we label these events as just a roll of the dice, or just sheer luck and coincidence, or really, to put it another way, that it's just sheer statistical probability that these events occurred in our lives. Now, this is not to criticize statistics or probability or this form of science, because without this form of science, we wouldn't have, for example, been able to build rocket ships to send us into space and go to the moon. So it's important to be rational. However, perhaps we have to also consider that what happens outside of us, or the reality that we experience, that there's a lot more underneath the surface of what we experience in everyday life, and more importantly, what happens underneath our consciousness and how our perceptions and our observations can influence our external environment as well. So, to describe what's called the observer effect, the observer effect is the fact that observing a situation or phenomenon necessarily changes it. Observer effects are especially prominent in physics, where observation and uncertainty are fundamental aspects of modern quantum mechanics. So based on the definition of the observer effect and within quantum mechanics is that our observation as the observer, what we focus on, can potentially influence the material world or the events that happen externally. And again, the implications of this are very profound. And there's much debate about how much influence we can manifest or bring about forth in our external environment. But perhaps we also have to consider that perhaps we're not very good observers. Nevertheless, the implications of this are very profound. And as Gary Lankman, the author of The Secret Teachers of the Western World, says, synchronicity, Jung's name for the phenomenon of meaningful coincidence, tells us that something which in logical terms should not be meaningful or have any connection to my inner world nevertheless does. And the notion of correspondence tells us that something is more than itself, that it is also a symbol of some higher significance. For Aristotle, and as for Gertrude Stein, a rose is a rose and nothing else. For the esoteric, a rose is a rose, but it is also much else. So really, by observing our external world and by noticing these coincidences or synchronicities or events and people that shape our lives, is it really just random chance and probability? Or is there much more to it? And we have to start questioning as to whether or not we're actually very good observers. Chances are we're not, because as I said before, many of us, and myself included, I'm guilty of this, we often tend to be very distracted when it comes to observing ourselves and the cause and effect of the events in our lives. And as Jung says, every emotional state produces an alteration of consciousness. That is to say, there is a certain narrowing of consciousness and a corresponding strengthening of the unconscious, which particularly in the case of strong effects is noticeable even to the layman. So we think of thousands of thoughts every single day. And I forgot the number as to how many. I think there's 70,000 thoughts a day. That's probably a minimum. But chances are many of these thoughts are probably negative in nature or are influenced by our perceptions and what we're exposed to from the noise of our external environment, from the social media we experience or use on a daily basis, or what we digest, to the news we watch, to the conversations we have. This influences our thoughts and behaviors. And the emotional intensity behind these thoughts and behaviors can potentially impact what happens outside of us or can shape our circumstances. So really, when you think about it, if we are thinking negative thoughts and the emotions behind those thoughts are based on anger, fear, and stress, then chances are that's going to impact our entire day, where we have negative circumstances like having arguments with your boss, perhaps getting stuck in traffic, meeting people that you don't get along with, or other negative circumstances that are a direct result of your current attitude. But if your mindset and your thoughts are based on the emotions of abundance and happiness and joy, then more positive experiences can shape your life for the better and can occur in your everyday life. Again, the implications are very profound as to how our thoughts and emotions can influence our lives. Dr. Joe Dispenza, who is the author of You Are the Placebo and Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, said that our thoughts and feelings come from your past memories. If you think and feel a certain way, you begin to create an attitude. An attitude is a cycle of short-term thoughts and feelings experienced over and over again. Attitudes are shortened states of being. If you are a string of series of attitudes together, you create a belief. Beliefs are more elongated states of being and tend to become subconscious. When you add beliefs together, you create a perception. Your perceptions have everything to do with the choices you make, the behaviors you exhibit, the relationships you choose, and the realities you create. Dispenza makes a very good point here, because chances are many of our thoughts and feelings come from the experiences of the past. Our brains are essentially a reservoir, or a warehouse for that matter, to use a better term. A warehouse of all the emotions and feelings and memories of the past. And we relive these past memories and past thoughts and feelings over and over again. And chances are we allow the past to influence the present and shape our future. And that our thoughts and attitude, which is more on a negative nature, or if we have more of a negative mindset, can potentially influence our circumstances or an external environment in a negative way. But if we change our perceptions and begin to be much more deliberate in what we choose to think about or what we focus on, again, what we observe in our lives, we can begin making about changes by thought alone. That it's not just about trying to force things to happen, but instead trying to become what it is that you want to embody in your life, or you want to see brought forth into your life. So how do we do this? Well, it all starts about thinking about how we're thinking, trying to look at our lives and what kind of results we're bringing forth and what we would like to see occur. And this requires patience and ultimately the will to meditate about this so that we can see to bring about change. But this is well worth the work, because once we start to see life from a new lens and change our perceptions about our lives and begin to realize that our words and our thoughts matter and are extremely powerful, we can be much more mindful of what we think about. And as I said before, be more deliberate in the direction of the kind of life we want to go. And this is extremely empowering, because once we become conscious of our unconscious selves, once we become aware of the power of our thoughts and begin to see that our thoughts can influence our external environment, this is an incredibly euphoric and empowering feeling, because then we realize we're no longer victims and that we have much more power to manifest the kind of things we want to see in our lives for the better and transcend into becoming something more.